go to our next speaker if he's able to join the stage. Thank you very much. Yeah, so we'll check if everything works. If you can be on stage. Hello, Ismael. How are you doing? You are on mute, Ismael.
Even better now that I can speak. So great.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you. Yes, so we'll hope you enjoy your time with us. With a nice AsyncApi logo, and I invite you to share your slides and or your screen, and so you can go.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And first of all, thanks for the last presentation. And I have to add, as a kind of recent arrival, the community of AsyncApi is fantastic. It's one of the best open source contribution experiences, both in terms of how well organized it is and the culture of it. So yeah, if in doubt, even if you've never touched it, just the community is worth it. So yeah, highly recommend it. So today, I am addressing sort of design first and event first, and AsyncApi, and sort of how they connect or not together. So first of all, this is what I'm going to be covering. It doesn't really tell you very much, so you'll have to follow and see. Now, about me, my name is Ismael Velasco, and I am a Mexican cosmopolite based in Suffolk in England. I am development technical lead at grace.com, and I am an opera singer with the Verdi asynchronous baritones. And you can also find me on Twitter, and please connect, because it's a fantastic conversation that's going on in Twitter. I think it's yeah, I'm hugely appreciating it. And in addition to working at Grace, I am very passionate about social impact. I created a social innovation consultancy. I host the Greener Web and it should say Greener Infra in Climate Action Tech Slack group, which is fantastic. And I'm one of the organizers with the International Environment Forum at COP26, etc. So these are interests. If you're interested in any sort of tech for good type thing, please hit me up. And as to that, well, it's not actually true. I'm not really with an opera singer with a very asynchronous baritones, but the rest is in fact true. So I want to take us I think we've been looking at very granular ways at AsyncApi, and I want to take a kind of more design-based perspective. And one of the things that many of you will be aware of is Conway's law. Conway's law says that applications, the architecture of software applications, reflects the communication flows of the company or organization that is building them. So if you've got sort of 5 departments, then chances are your architecture will be divided into 5 parts. And sort of that mesh between technology and organization culture seems quite significant. And it seems to me that in this sort of this perspective of Conway's law applies more generally at the sort of social level too, so that society has been really quite synchronous and hierarchical and not very event-driven really for quite a long time in the industrialized North. So, we go to school at the same time regardless of events. We tend to go to work likewise, regardless of whether we're feeling happy or sad or energetic or switched on or switched off. As developers, we tend to have more choice in that matter. And likewise, our technology, our APIs are sort of traditionally REST APIs, and others are sort of known as sort of command and response APIs. And they seem to mirror, and our technology, generally our infrastructure, has seemed to work really in this synchronous command request mode mostly. And likewise, therefore, like society, so has, you plugged things in order to switch them on. You press things in order to sort of trigger behavior. You commanded and responded. Most of our technology for most of history has been synchronous. Most recently, that has changed. Our technology has become and is becoming increasingly asynchronous. Our Internet of Things and microservices and just general approaches are more about communication and messaging, and less, and they are asynchronous and agnostic, and they are reactive in a big way. And society seems to be moving in that way too. Sort of the pandemic accelerated that dramatically. So we're able to kind of be more organic. Now, I spent some time living in Tanzania amongst a Maasai tribe. And it was very interesting because one of the challenges that we have with asynchronous systems and APIs, the biggest challenge in a sense is getting the balance right. So the asynchronous nature of it gives you wonderful advantages. It gives you decoupling, it gives you reactivity, it gives you delay tolerance, etc. But of course, the trade-off is that communication can get quite complicated. In complexity theory, someone said something quite beautiful that I think applies to all kinds of areas of life. That complexity, which is life, emerges on the edge between order and chaos. Too much order and the system doesn't evolve, and too much chaos and entropy wins. So I think this is something that we tackle in asynchronous systems over and over again. And sort of when we moved en masse into microservices from monoliths, everyone was very excited. And now we have another sort of technical debt crisis as people go, oh, sort of my microservices are not talking to each other in a coherent way, or I've got the worst of both worlds. Now, the reason I want to reflect on Tanzania is because the Maasai are a completely event-driven community. They have almost no technology in the sort of electronic sense. They live completely in touch with the land. There might be, 3 phones in the village, 1 old cassette recorder, and an occasional car that comes once a week. But the rest is all transient and organic and sustainable. And if you say, let's meet at 9 o'clock, your meeting is going to be empty. But if you say, let's meet sort of at sunrise, or let's meet at breakfast, then people will coincide because those events will move. People will not have, you will have a nomadic pastoralist community. And then if there's a need for an injection of cash, at that point, some sort of Maasai warrior will go into the city and work for a few weeks or months and then return. And the weather, the sort of light, the harvest, all of these events will shape the flow of communication and the flow of interaction. And there is this fine balance between this reactive approach and just enough structure to allow people to communicate in predictable ways. So if you're a young sort of Maasai warrior before you've kind of graduated, you're not allowed to eat alone. You have to always eat in a group so that if someone is missing food, they'll be able to share. There are codes like that. There are ways of resolving problems in a very consultative fashion that kind of escalates. So it seems to me that ecosystem and that way of thinking about society and communication and reciprocity and reactivity, etc., is something that sort of gets us now back here to this sort of API days that, has, other than that, very little in common with the Maasai life. But I think what we are trying to create in this new ecosystem is that balance between too much and too little structure. And that means that unlike the command response ecosystem, where things are based on structure, your job, your career, your sort of role in the family, here it is based on process. We want to create only enough structure for completely diverse devices, services, systems to communicate in a coherent and autonomous way, in ways that sort of advance their individual interests, but sort of vary and nevertheless cohere. So traditionally, what that has meant is that it has been quite hard to bring it all together, because you will build your protocol, your system, and at the end of it, you will expose it to talk to other systems. And if you're in the same protocol as another system, well, that helps. But you might want to talk to yet another system. And really what tends to happen then is that we build our APIs in the sense of sort of the communication interface last. We first sort of build our technology, our application, our use purpose, particularly because we're agnostic. We don't know who's going to consume it in this publisher subscriber ecosystem. We just know we're going to send it out. So we're focused on how do we send it out most efficiently and how do we talk around protocols. But that layer of communication means that we can easily then get lost in translation. And this can happen on two levels. It can happen if you're a larger organization, for example, and different teams are working on different corners or services of an application. And they might not necessarily be thinking of how exactly others will consume them. So that interoperability becomes increasingly challenging. And the other area is when you are talking outside of your ecosystem to others who might be interested in interacting or consuming the messages that you emit. And one of the things that also we have in common in that sense with Tanzania is that when I was there was one time when we were having a conversation and sort of sharing stories, and I would speak in English, which somebody would translate into Swahili, which then someone would translate into Maasai, or the other way around. Someone would translate it to Maasai, and then the Maasai would translate it to Swahili for other people. And I think that's a situation that's familiar for many of us working in distributed architectures and event-first approaches. So the challenge, I think, is how do we create a communication approach protocol that allows us to communicate? Imagine if in the world, again thinking of the macro scale, if we had some kind of Esperanto, some kind of universal auxiliary language. I still speak Spanish or English, etc. But there is this other language that everybody learns. So wherever you are traveling in the world, as the events happens, you bump into someone else, you can communicate with each other instantly. How would that ability to communicate globally? Most of the interethnic conflicts in the world are also linguistic conflicts. So you can imagine that if we did have a common language in the planet, both the possibilities for collaboration, the tapping and sharing of ideas, and the reduction of conflicts would be dramatic. And I think this is what AsyncApi is sort of trying to offer, or is actually offering. And I think the story of AsyncApi is its own demonstration. The fact that Fran Mendes just basically tried to twist OpenAPI to fit his asynchronous use and kept kind of hitting walls where post was a message or was a publish, and things didn't quite scale. And then he came up with this kind of draft, and everybody working in event-driven architectures went, I'll have some of that. And at pretty vertiginous speed, it's here today. And it's in Linux Foundation, and it's in Postman, and it has this fantastic collaborative community. And I think the reason is that it takes out the challenge of speaking Swahili to translate to Maasai in order to be understood in English. It allows you to have that auxiliary world language for event-driven architectures. And what that makes possible is that you can begin now with API first, with design first. Your spec creates the kind of configuration that gives you the power that the previous talk illustrated so clearly. You are able to suddenly have asynchronous development processes where you don't have to have, your system doesn't have to be in place for consumers or subscribers of that system to be able to build around it. Because thanks to your spec, your configuration, you are actually able to mock everything that will come out of it. So you're already able to consume that application before the application even exists. That universal language allows you to understand each other, which also means that, other tendencies around domain-driven design and wordly mapping, these elements of trying to create commonality, become increasingly powerful. And the benefits that we've seen with sort of the convergence around OpenAPI specs for REST APIs suddenly become possible for AsyncAPI. And I think because of the nature of events, then the potential of that common language is even greater than it has been in REST APIs and in synchronous communication. Because what we will be able to create in an organic way will be less like it's 9 o'clock, you have to go to school no matter what, you have to go to the office as opposed to work from sort of where it works. And it will be a lot more like that Maasai community process that is self-organizing, that has soft rules around it, but that it allows it to cohere and communicate and create, but this time on a global scale powered by technology. So I guess this presentation really aimed to bring that broader perspective of the design perspective behind AsyncAPI and how that process of communication is both a technical one, but also a human one. And that the more we begin to interoperate via that auxiliary language, I think the room for innovation and the business case for asynchronous systems and the sort of cost of complexity will all radically improve and benefit. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Ismael, thank you very much for all of this. Just a quick question on this. So, in the past software history, we had a panel yesterday. You start your talk by saying everything was synchronous. Now it's more asynchronous. But let's say we have seen many things, many trends going back. So, do you think this asynchronous moment, how long it will stay, and until when? What will be the next step?
Well, I think this is one of the reasons I was making those parallels between the macro and the micro, between sort of Conway's law at organizational levels and more generally. I think this asynchronous, event-driven, decentralized architecture reflects where society as a whole is moving. So I don't think it's a fad. I think it's a symptom, as it were, an epiphenomenon of a broader trend. I think we are communicating, we are interacting, and the structures that we built in the analog synchronous age, hit barriers, whether it is with educational systems or work or place, etc. So my impression is that, the multiplication of Internet of Things devices, the kind of quantified self, like there's so many applications. I don't think this is going away. I think what we might have is a kind of rebalancing, a course correction, where it doesn't have to be microservices. It can be loosely coupled monoliths, for example. But that, and we're also, we don't give up this element of rules. Structure's still needed, right? So I don't think we'll give up on sort of request command synchronous communication. This is synchronous communication, and it is much better than asynchronous for this kind of setting. So I would imagine both will remain, but I don't think, and we might have a more mature interaction, not least through this kind of open API spec and async API specs interacting and co-evolving. So I think that's going to keep growing, but perhaps in a more integrated and more holistic way as time goes by.
Well, would you say that, let's say, synchronous communication is just one particular use case of asynchronous communication? So everything should be event first, right? Communication, and sometimes, when it makes sense, it can be synchronous. This is the mindset you are pushing?
Not really, because I think it's much more complementary. That's kind of where I think this is going. I think at some point, at the moment, it's all kind of novel. So we're making choices and thinking in those two ways. Whereas the reality is that, for example, AsyncApi creates a structure. It's that element of order in the complexity. So I wouldn't be surprised if, in order for asynchronous communication and event-driven things to thrive, you need a sort of framework of synchronous communication, and vice versa. So I imagine that they will measure and validate each other. So you've gone too far one way when the other end starts suffering. And I would imagine that new ways of thinking will emerge that are just beginning now, because it's still so early. And old ways of thinking will return as well.
Yeah, it's just the beginning. A really quick question that someone is asking: what do you use as a software? Do you use OBS plus Genially, the software to run the video?
For the presentation,
Yeah,
yes.
for the presentation.
First time with Genially, and I really like it. I obviously, since it's the first time I haven't invested, so you all get to see the promotion at the end. Do you want to create something with this? Do it. But I think it's worth investing because it has limitations compared to PowerPoint in terms of how you can change things, but it's much more elegant and beautiful, etc. And when you pay for it, you can export to PowerPoint. So you get the best of both worlds. So I might go in that direction at some point, but I have certainly enjoyed interacting with Genially.
Perfect, Ismael. Thank you very much for your talk and ending the Async API, let's say, a segment of the conference. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.